We're following President Trump as he is heading to Michigan today. The president is expected to tout his economic policies in that key battleground state. And of course, today, 99 days to go before the midterm elections. This is an important hinge point for messaging and policies. And also, we're just a few days away from some more high-stakes primaries, so we're watching all of it for you. In Seattle, a manhunt is underway. After a deadly shooting that happened last night, police say 3 people were killed, 4 others injured, including a 2-year-old little child. When 2 suspects opened fire at each other at a crowded food festival underneath the Space Needle. Well, they hit everybody else. 1 suspect is in custody. The second remains at large. Authorities say there is no threat to the public that they can determine at this point. We'll bring you any new details as we get them. And this Fox News alert, Dr. Anthony Fauci is now expected to be on Capitol Hill on Wednesday. He will be given sworn testimony on the COVID pandemic. A lot of questions looming still all these years later. This comes as newly released diary entries show Fauci became obsessed with his own fame, even as COVID deaths were soaring throughout the United States. You're watching Outnumbered. I'm Harris Faulkner, here with my co-host Emily Campagno. And joining us today, Cheryl Casoni, Fox business anchor and host of American Dream Home on Fox Business. Kaylee McGee-White, Fox News contributor, and Paul Morrow, attorney, retired NYPD inspector, Fox News contributor, and host of the weekly Rap Sheet on Fox Nation. Senator Rand Paul has released Anthony Fauci's diary entries, and they appear to show a man more focused on his own stardom than tackling the global pandemic that was killing people. One entry from May 2020 reads this way. Big front page article about me appeared in the Washington Post. Very flattering. The situation with my national and international fame is explosive and really unimaginable. It is not hyperbolic to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country. I'm one of the most recognizable persons in the world. Countless profiles on me. I cannot even read all the things that were written about me since I am so busy. Literally. All of that's a quote. By that point, nearly 100,000 Americans had already died from COVID. Now look here. These are just a few clippings taken from the doctor's diary. Donuts with his face on them, his own bobblehead, the Fauci pouchies, and a collage of first responders wearing shirts with his name on them. Fauci was bragging in his diary about his role getting lockdowns implemented. Here's what he wrote, quote, I spoke with Bill de Blasio, that was the mayor of New York at the time, as you may know, and convinced him based on what I was saying publicly and my conversation tonight to close the NYC schools, he had already decided based on what I was saying on TV. I had a similar call with Ann O'Leary, the chief of staff of Governor Gavin Newsom's office, and said, based on my TV appearances, the governor has decided to close the schools in California as well as the bars and restaurants. That's different than what I told The Hill in 2022.
I wonder if you would recommend locking down schools if you had to do it all over again.
Well, you know, again, it's first of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. You're asking me questions. You're talking about the CDC is the public health agency that uses their epidemiologists and their science-based approach to make recommendations.
But he said they made those decisions based on what he said on TV. Fauci's obsession with his own fame seems even starker when put into numbers. The phrases peer review, meta-analysis, risk-benefit, learning loss, and mental health appear a grand total of 0 times in the diary entries. Meanwhile, award, 80 mentions. Hero, 49 times. Instagram, 36 times. Selfie, 19 times. And there were 641 entries headed with the word press. Paul.
So I would argue that we shouldn't be distracted by what is undeniably a very unbecoming profile of this guy emerging, right? There's a little bit here of the high school nerd that all of a sudden is the homecoming king, you know, so he was having his big moment in the sun. I get that, but that isn't really the issue. A couple of issues I would argue here are really more important. Number one, we can't make the same mistakes again. So the idea that we lost an entire generation who didn't get socialized through school and now are not prepared for the real world because they lived their lives in their bedroom staring at a computer screen, terrified of opening a window, that's something we can't repeat. But I think most importantly is the following. We still don't definitively have an answer where the thing came from. Now, there were 3 places in the world that did this gain-of-function kind of research. One of them happened to be Wuhan. And yet we managed to get gaslighted by the PRC, People's Republic of China, saying, we had nothing to do with this. This is propaganda, anti-Chinese propaganda. In my estimation, there's no denying that China leashed this thing upon the world. I'm not saying that they did it cognizantly, but it almost certainly came from there. And if that had been America, can you imagine the blowback we'd be paying for Europe's health care for the next 200 years? Everybody wants to talk about the ICC these days. How many hundreds of thousands of people died because of this thing, and China caught no flack? If there's one person on earth that we can get in front of the Senate who can shed some light on this, it's this guy. That's the issue. Did we pay for it, and did it come from China? To me, that's what I want to know.
And should we trust, Emily, that he would tell the truth about that now that we know that what he was really focusing on was not what you just talked about?
I mean, part of what we have on our side are the sort of astoundingly honest receipts in his diary. I frankly was, I guess I should be grateful for his honesty, but I'm so shocked that a physician of such stature or experience was so blatantly self-obsessed and so blatantly joy-riding and joy-surfing on that media coverage of him. What stood out to me, 2 things. Number one, the stark contrast between him when he would record the death toll of that day and then in the same page go on to talk about the press coverage that he had enjoyed that day. I was so shocked. Being surrounded by incredible men and women of science and medicine around us, and particularly there at the AFIP and the CDC and the like, to have one to reveal the curtains that they're just someone high on their own fame, to me, it is such a disservice to all of those men and women in uniform who actually do it for the love of science and their fellow man. And then secondly, he said in his diaries, he talked about that the lab actually amplified, the lab leak amplified all of the entire epidemic rather than during that time, which was covered by the media, by the way, saying that it was sort of an after effect or it just happened to occur there in Wuhan. So I think, yes, we will get those answers because we have the black and white writing that he shared in the diary about it. But you're absolutely right. What I don't want to see is the Hill starting to obsess over what is clearly just a shameful persona. And they need to focus on those answers. And also, we need to take this as a lesson for the media worship factor. The people that put him on the cover of Vanity Fair and InStyle and all of those things, guys, there is no way in heck that we should ever worship another human like that again, especially under the circumstances with hundreds of thousands of people dying.
That's such a great point because everybody else also had the purview, I mean, just all of us as citizens, to turn this off. Like to turn him off, not to pay attention to that side of him that just kept him in front of the cameras with no useful information. I remember the day that he had to admit, well, maybe not cloth masks. Maybe not. They don't wear them in surgery. Like, what do you, it took you weeks, months to tell us maybe not cloth masks?
Totally.
I was not surprised by the diary reveal when it came out, because back in 2020, when I was in this building covering COVID and the thousands upon thousands of people that were dying every day, I had many sources in the medical community voice their frustration with Dr. Anthony Fauci as this was all unfolding in real time. And what they told me is, basically, Paul, to your point, funny, not funny, here's somebody, no one knew who he was. He was shielded in an office. He never got any attention. He was never part of any, meetings. I mean, he really was just kind of this silent figure. And then this became the guy's Super Bowl. And I hate to say that because of what was unleashed on our nation, because of his miscalculations and, again, his ego. But I was told about that from doctors. they were very frustrated by some of the advice he was giving, and they were vehement in telling me that they disagreed with the masks, absolutely, but many of the other things that he said. This is what's going to make Wednesday so interesting when this hearing comes on, because remember, Senator Paul is bringing him in because he's accusing him of lying to Congress. It goes back to the Wuhan lab, goes back to gain-of-function funding, all of that. But there's text messages that have been revealed, and I can't wait to hear, well, whether he answered the questions or not, we'll see. But how is Fauci going to respond to black and white text messages showing him putting pressure on other scientists to follow his narrative? That goes back to the ego that you're talking about, Emily. That is this man. And look, he's lawyered up. We know he's lawyered up. And by the way, just to add this for Wednesday, he already got that big old pardon from departing Joe Biden, whether it was Joe Biden or the Autopen. I don't know who signed it, but he's got an all-encompassing pardon. So whether or not he's forthcoming, I don't know. But there's a lot of questions, and it's infuriating what has happened to our nation because of him.
Haley.
Well, I agree with everything that Paul and Emily were saying about the ego. However, I do think that the shameful persona is important, because the cherry on top of all of this is that the American taxpayers were funding it. Keep in mind that while this was happening, Anthony Fauci was the highest paid, quote-unquote, public servant in the federal government. He was making more than $450,000 a year to pose for magazine-style photo shoots, to have dinner with Jake Tapper, and to solicit for his own highly paid awards. There was one nugget in these diary entries that I found very revealing, which showed him soliciting various scientists to nominate him for these highly paid awards. There was one in particular where he emailed Barton Haynes at Duke University to nominate him for the Dan Davis Prize. He ended up winning that, including the $1 million prize money attached to it. Now, none of you are going to be surprised to learn that Barton Haynes at Duke has received more than $1.2 billion in research funding from Fauci's own agency. That is corruption, pure and simple, and the American taxpayers were paying for it. The other thing that I will say is the other most shocking thing about these diary entries, and the reason why they are so important, is that because it reveals the cavalier attitude with which he treated the consequences of his own recommendations and his own policies. There was another entry where President Trump actually ripped into Fauci and Deborah Birx, accusing them of deceiving him and of deceiving the nation. And Fauci wrote in his diary, quote, "I encouraged her that we are okay, and at the end of the day, she and I will be loved by the people we care about." Who were the people that he cared about? Were they the tens of millions of children who were deprived of any social experience, who have been robbed of academic achievement? Was it the tens of thousands of elderly people who were forced to die alone because their relatives weren't allowed to physically be present with them? Was it the tens of thousands of Americans who were censored online for rightly pointing out that Fauci was wrong about just about everything that he said? No, the only people that Fauci cared about were the people waving their little Fauci bobbleheads. And most of all, the only person that he actually cared about was himself. There has to be accountability. It's not enough to say that he was a malignant narcissist, even though he was. He is an evil person, probably one of the most to have a position of influence in this country.
I nominate you to take a seat at the hearing.
That's right.
Have a guest portion. You should be in it. That's exactly right. And the money. And remember, he was still being paid for years after. Yeah, because he got paid after his position ended.
Well, he's getting paid now. You ever see his pension is in the mid-six figures.
Well, it's at $450 a year times however many. All right, we'll move on. Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube, and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.